Good evening, Shalom Aleichem to all of you. I hope you can hear me. I'm presently somewhere halfway between Gatwick Airport and Stamford Hill. So let's go straight to our questions. So there we are. First question is, can we use a, so here's a, it's a humidifier. Because it's hot weather, so they want to have the room to be cooled off. And the way it works, apparently, is that there's an internal fan and there's a tank of water, a tub at the bottom, and the fan blows air over the water, and that gives a refreshing, cooling effect to the room. So is that okay for Shabbos? Would you be allowed to add water to the to this tank so that it should be able to continue cooling on Shabbos? So when I looked at this, I was concerned. We have here Halocho in the end of Siman shiur tes. Siman shiur tes is about boiler. Boiler has got another two variations of zoyre and meraked. Meraked is sifting, and zoyre is wind. Is winnowing, using wind for separating the chaff from the grain. So that's the malacha of boiler. Of zoyre. Here we have a Yerushalmi which says the following: one who spits and the wind scatters the spit. So is chayiv mishum zoyre. It comes into the issur of zoyre. In other words, the original malacha of zoyre is to use wind to separate bad from good. The chiddush of this mahala is to say that even if it's just roik, just spit, and is using the wind to distribute it, that comes under zoyre. That would really raise the question where any use of sprays on Shabbos could be a question of this. So the poskim say that generally the aerosols are just a distribution of liquid without a mixture of air. So an aerosol could be used on Shabbos. But if it is here, clearly a mixture of water particles and air pressure, that comes under the issur of zoyre. It's not unanimous, but it does come into this thing. So therefore I told the question, well, I want to ask me about this. I told them not to use it on Shabbos. Okay, let's move on to the next point. That is there a specific minimum size for a yarmulke? This came up after last week's discussion about the union of Hukas Hagoy, about why it has to wear a yarmulke. So someone asked me afterwards last Thursday night, is there a minimum size for a yarmulke? So here you have this is from the Sefer Piskei Teshuvos, a volume, Siman Beis, and let's read the text here. The kisui roish hakavana sheyiya al kol ponim shetach roiv shetach charkaftoi chuse kisui hanika. That the majority of the scalp should be covered with a noticeable covering. The nira heitu le'ein koil should be visible, should be clearly visible. That was the tradition always, to have a larger yarmulke which would be visible. But that which we see in recent generations, make tiny yarmulkes which don't cover the majority of the head. We get a kisu. Some say if it doesn't cover the majority of the head, that's not good enough. But yesh hakoisvim, there are those who say shekol shakipa nireis, so long as the kippah is visible, but the keres hate to be called tzidudei harosh. So long as it's visible from whichever way, that would be also adequate. So even if it doesn't cover the majority of the scalp, but if it's visible from any direction. Aval hakipos haktanos moed, but the very small kippos, even if they are placed b'merkaz harosh, even if they're just in the middle, Ein ze begedek tisiklar. So listen, there certainly is here a position that the kippah, the yarmulke, should be something which is visible and preferably large enough to cover the majority of the head. Let's go on to the next point. Here's the third question is about, listen, the story here is about a woman who doesn't have eyebrows and is asking to put on to what's called microblading, is apparently to create artificial eyebrows. So is that okay? So here, this is what I have here is from the sefer called Nishmas Avraham, which is dealing with medical issues relating to halacha, and this is in the section which talks about where it talks about not putting on a tattoo. So here he has the following. So he says, Rabbi Azra Batsri was asked about the doctors wish to give a woman who does not have eyebrows. They want to make some kind of engraving which is going to be similar to eyebrows. That's going to be with a kind of tattoo. Is that forbidden or is that okay? So Rav Batsri in his response says, since it's not a tattoo of writing, it's just of ink, a line, etc. Plus, you're not interested in, well, he says, at any rate, he says, yes, person's embarrassed that they don't have eyebrows, so this would be permitted to give them eyebrows so they shouldn't feel embarrassed. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So here, one of our listeners is online now, sent me an interesting piece where talking about taking a towel after use and spreading it out. Now, there is a Mishnah which talks about not spreading out a towel. It looks like you've just done your laundry. But then this safe is medayik from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, that it's only if it's been heavily soaked. That's when you shouldn't be spreading it out to dry. But if it's just a little bit wet, then that's okay. So this is we have here from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. I think it's a shiur Chavov. It says you shouldn't go on Shabbos in a place where you might slip and drench yourself. In case you'll soak your clothing. And then if you did walk and you got drenched, so he says, here he says, second line, if his clothing got drenched with a lot of rain. Then he says he doesn't have to take them off. And then the second paragraph says, when he does take them off, he shouldn't spread them out. Because of Marasai, and it looked like he's done his laundry. So here we have, though it's not so mamash direct, but here this statement is showing Alter Rebbe has seen the concern of that might be seen that he's done his laundry is only by shopping harbe. Okay. Someone's asked something. Let's see, sorry. So here we have, can you hang up soaked clothing? The answer is no. If it's been soaked, you should not be hanging it out on Shabbos because of Marasai. Let's move on to our next question. Question number 5, opening cartons of drink on Shabbos. Okay, so here someone sent me, one of our regular listeners, are opening a carton on Shabbos. So there's two things. Here's about unscrewing this cap. And not so sure about that, although I'm inclined to take the lenient view on opening plastic caps, like a milk bottle, etc. But here the next problem is you open the cap. Sometimes you twist the cap. That itself breaks the seal. In this case, you open the cap, and then there's a seal which you have to pull and open it. So what's the problem here? So let's go into Shulchan. So here we have a Simashin Yud Dalet, talking about building on Shabbos. So the principle is there's no din of binyan or stira. There's no din of building when it comes to kalim, unless it's mamish from scratch. So to take a flat pack and make it into a table, that's also. But if it's just a lesser kind of building, it's not a problem. Therefore, he talks here about a keli which was broken and stuck together. So you would be allowed to break it open to take out the food. So this is the basis of opening kalim. This is the basis of opening cartons, etc. The assumption that it's not a strong keli, and therefore you'd be allowed to open it to take out the food. However, the Alter Rebbe then says, why is it not stira? Because it's not a binyan gam. You should avoid making a neat opening, because that will, you shouldn't be cutting a neat opening. Right. So this is where we have a problem. Coming back, when you would break this seal open, you're going to make a neat opening. It's going to be a convenient way of pouring in a neat way. It's not going to spill in all directions. There usually is a plastic lining underneath, and when you pull this ring, you're going to release that. You're going to snap this plastic lining underneath. You're going to create a neat opening. So all of these cartons, which when you open them, you're making a neat opening. So here you have that problem of nakvo, nekev yofe, and pesach noah. So instead, what I would recommend is take a knife and stab the carton towards the top. Just stab it with a knife, and then that's not going to create a neat opening. How will you then use it? Either you will pour the whole contents into another jug, or you'll manage with a not neat opening. But to make a neat opening is a problem. Now, there is another, and perhaps we've addressed this before, there are those who talk about making a hole in the bottom of a can before making opening at the top. I want to make that clear. That is the opinion of the Chazon Ish. And he's seeing in a closed can as if it's not a keli. Therefore, by making a hole at the bottom before you open at the top, you've preempted, you've made it a non-keli before you make it a keli. Shlomo Zalman and others clearly disagree with that. And they say that a can is a keli. So making a hole in the bottom of the can is actually not a solution at all, because you're taking a keli and you're ruining a keli. And so that's not really okay. So this you hear it again and again. So Tazam Mazel, it keeps on coming up that people say, I'll make a hole at the bottom. According to the other poskim, making a hole in the bottom doesn't solve anything at all. On the contrary, it's actually you're ruining a keli, which is a good keli. Let's move on. So here, someone asked a question about giving a name after a grandparent who died young. So normally, when there's, in such a case, a person who died young, there's a concern of not giving a name after them because not such a good mazel. Now, I want to tell you, years ago, I once asked Rabbi Groner about this, and he said that in similar cases that Rebbe had said that the nifter, this was a person who wanted to name after his brother who was killed in a car crash. And the Rabbi Groner told me that in similar cases that Rebbe had said that the one who was nifter, tragically young, was named after a previous person. So you can have in mind you're naming after the previous generation. Be that as it may, here was a case of a grandfather, and here we have a clear answer of the Rebbe that don't worry about it, because there's a mitzvah of kibud av. Sorry about that. The mitzvah of kibud av, which the Torah compares to kavod hamokim, And therefore, don't worry about it, and you can give the name. All right, let's move on. Okay, we're jumping ahead. So here someone's asking about davening Mincha and Maariv, both one after the other, one before Shkia and one after Shkia. So we have a man called Plag haMincha, and the time of Plag haMincha is an hour and a quarter before the end of the day. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can daven Maariv after Plag haMincha, and for him it's too late to daven Mincha after Plag haMincha. In other words, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to daven Mincha maximum an hour and a quarter before the end of the day. So we have these two opinions, and just certainly during the summer, people tend to rely on Rabbi Yehuda to daven Maariv early. But if you're davening Maariv early, so you can't daven Mincha late, because it's either you're following Rabbi Yehuda or you're following the other opinion. Either you're following Rabbi Yehuda or the Chachamim. So someone's asking me the following question: is there any saving factor by davening Mincha just before Shkia and davening Maariv right after Shkia? So to make things simple, I know there's a lot of background noise, so just try to make it simple, is the following. There's two ways of calculating shiur zmaniyos. Is it from sunrise to sunset, or is it from dawn to dusk? So there's two ways. Now, if you say that the day is counted from dawn to dusk, now that means until Tzesek Chovim. Tzesek Chovim from Shkia is 72 minutes. Daled Milin. An hour and a quarter is 75 minutes. So if you say that you're going to count your shiur zmaniyos from dawn to dusk, so then 3 minutes before Shkia is Plag haMincha. So then if you daven Mincha 10 minutes before Shkia, you daven Maariv just after Shkia. So according to that opinion, you've davened Mincha before Plag haMincha and Maariv after Plag haMincha. In any case, the poskim say that for Friday evening, one can be more mekel, even though it seems to be a contradiction. If it's at Mincha time or Maariv time, but on a Friday evening, especially, one can rely on the, even though it's just to daven Mincha and Maariv one after the other, especially when otherwise you wouldn't be able to get a minyan together. Let's move on. Oh, so this is where you have Sefer. This is a Sefer called Isha Yisrael, a specialist Sefer on Hichas Tefillah, excellent Sefer, and where he writes, places where there's a concern that if you wait between Mincha and Maariv, you won't have a minyan for Maariv, then you can be mekel to daven Mincha after Plag haMincha, before Shkia, and right afterwards to daven Maariv, even though Maariv will be before Tzesek Chovim. I quoted from this say from the Isha Yisrael, although it's discussed in Mishnah Brura, but Mishnah Brura is not so clear. Now, to Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, this whole area is missing, unfortunately, but even Mishnah Brura, it's not so clear. So he spells it out quite clearly that if otherwise you wouldn't get a minyan together, you can do Mincha just before Shkia and Maariv just after Shkia. Here we have a question. Okay, point 7 was about asking a boy to bring a baby through the street on Shabbos. This is something which generally I take a stricter view, especially in bigger cities where there's hundreds of thousands of people living, more than Shishim Ribui. Then I'm worried it's a Shusar Abend Reisa. The advice in this case is generally to employ a babysitter. Tell the babysitter you can join us if you wish. You can join us at this and this address, but we're not telling the babysitter to drive to take the buggy through the street. If she wants, you can. Okay, let's move on to this question about mezuzah. So here we have, as you can see on the left, a kind of looks like a shipping container, but it was a garden shed. The neighbor needed to do some cutting down this overgrown bush, as you can see, And so they dismantle the shed with the mezuzah. The question is now, when they'll rebuild the shed, do they need to put up the mezuzah again, or can they just leave the mezuzah as is? So this question is dealt with in Poskim. There's a similar question about a sukkah. If a house without a roof doesn't need to have a mezuzah. If you've got a room which has a roof and it has a mezuzah, then you took off the roof for sukkahs. Sukkahs are chag v'chag is poskim in the mezuzah. And after sukkahs, you put back the roof. Do you have to take off the mezuzah and put it back? So what is this question? It comes to the question of taseh loy mina osri. Mitzvahs have to be done, and you cannot take a possular piece of mitzvah and put it in place, and it should be all ready. So, for example, if your tzitzis snapped off your talus cotton, you can't take it and sew it back, because once it's snapped, it's possul, and it has to be vasisem. You have to tie it into the garment as it is a mitzvah. So, in this piece of Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Tesvav, this is in about a talus. What would happen if you had a talus, big talus, and it was torn in half? And now it's torn mamish all the way through, two separate pieces. Each one's got two tzitzits. And now sew them back together. Will you have to dismantle, unravel the tzitzis, or can you leave the tzitzis where they are? So here the poskim say, the Shulchan Aruch here in Siman Tesvav is saying that since each part is the size of a talus on its own, it's large enough to be a talus. Therefore, the two halves of the talus can be sewn together, because when you make a talus, in any case, you put two tzitzis and then another tzitzit, you put a talus, one at a time. And therefore, here you've got a talus, and it's a kosher the talus, kosher the tzitzis. But what would happen if the piece which was torn off was too small to be a talus? And certainly if it's not connected to a beged altogether, then you wouldn't be able to. So coming back to the mezuzah question, so when it's dismantled, there's no chiyuv mezuzah altogether. So the mitzvah kind of has become, it's no longer fulfilling a mitzvah. Therefore, when you put it back, you would have to take off the mezuzah and put it back again. So the fellow asks me, with a bracha or without the bracha? So here, this is a different question. I asked him, what exactly do you keep in your shed? In this shed. He told me he keeps the schach, he keeps the Pesach dishes, he keeps some old clothes, etc. Now, I ask you a simple question. Now, it's very popular. People put their stuff in storage. I have in yellow storage, I have a room where I put storage. Do I have to put the mezuzahs there? The answer is no. It's not a dwelling. Therefore, there's no need for mezuzah. So why do I need to have a mezuzah on a garden shed? So the answer is Sakya, or let's say a garage. The fact that the car sleeps there doesn't make it chayiv mezuzah. Yeah. As much as I love my car, but it doesn't make it a dwelling. What makes so I've got in the house, for example, I buy a bit of supplies, I buy a wholesale, so then I don't have space for everything in the house, so then I put it into the storage room. It can be an internal storage, but it's a kind of thing. I buy flour. I need some flour, I'll go to the shed and take some flour. Wine, lemonade. But it's an overflow of the larder in the house. That kind of shed does need a mezuzah. It's near the house, and as I say, it's an overflow of the house. The fact that you store schach there, or even I think the Pesach dishes, I don't see that as an overflow of your dwelling, in the rigid sense. It's long-term storage relatively, and therefore I told him that when if that's what you're using the shed for, it's not really for domestic stuff as such. Therefore, you wouldn't need to have mezuzah. I mean, same thing. People have bikes, buggies. I don't think such a shed, which is just for that kind of stuff, would require a mezuzah upon him. I would not make a bracha on such a storage. Right, we've almost finished our list of questions, and Sorry about the noise, but there we go. So the story was that someone in this country, on Shabbos, at some stage, noticed a hedgehog in the house. Very unusual. Don't see hedgehogs very often. And hedgehogs in the house is bechalop, so yakara metzias. But they weren't very impressed. And there we go. So they kind of tried to chase the hedgehog, and the hedgehog found a convenient corner under the stairs and curled itself into a ball, as hedgehogs do, and now was considered. So they said he used a stick to move the hedgehog away from its protective corner, and then moved it with his foot, moved the hedgehog with his foot to the door, and the hedgehog went on its merry way. So now, was that the right thing to do or not? Now here, there's a difference between the Taz and the Alter Rebbe. The Taz says that there's a concept called tiltul min hatzad, indirect movement. So the Taz says moving something with a stick is considered tiltul min hatzad. The Alter Rebbe quite emphatically disagrees, and he says that's, let's say you have at the table you have crumbs which are muksa. So to move them with a knife or something, so the Taz says that's okay because that's tiltul min hatzad. The Alter Rebbe says tiltul min hatzad means when, let's say, you come to your favorite armchair and there's some coins on it. So you can't lift the coins, even the tzorech mekoimoy. So you tilt the armchair and the coins fall on the floor and then you sit comfortably. That's called tiltul min hatzad. But to move it, something with a stick, that's called yoda arich. It's an extension of your hand, and that doesn't solve your muksa problem. And therefore, to move it with a stick, the answer is no, that's not okay. On the other hand, to kick it with your foot, moving things with your foot is considered kil'achayad. So here we've got, they sometimes seem to be interchangeable, but that due to different halachas. There's tiltul min hatzad and tiltul kil'achayad. Tiltul kil'achayad means moving things in an unusual way. I know it's not the normal way. So using your foot for hedgehogs is probably the normal way. But bichlal, moving stuff with your foot is not called a normal way of moving. And therefore the halacha is that moving things with your feet is considered tiltul kil'achayad. So to move the hedgehog, I have to be careful the way I say, but and caring about animals. But to move it gently with your foot is okay. Now the other question was are you allowed to put out poison? Because the family were never traumatized by these hedgehogs, and they thought that if they're going to put out pellets of poison, that will solve the problem. Are you allowed to put out poison for pests on Shabbos? So the pashtus you're not allowed to, because killing an animal is the issur of shoichet, of netilas nefesh. You're not allowed to kill an animal. That's direct. Of course, if you put out poison, you didn't actually kill them. They just left them to their own devices. So you could say it's certainly not over on shoichet by putting out some poison. On the other hand, I don't see how you can get out of muksa. So there's no heta to put out the poison on Shabbos. One last thing, and that is, I'm trying to get it. Right. Well, that was actually the last question on our list. What time is it now? Okay. All right. We're going to stop a little early, and we'll make our way from, as I said before, I'm halfway between Gatwick Airport and the Ir HaKodesh of Stamford Hill. And so I wish you a good evening and a good Shabbos, and seid alle gesund, and we should meet in good health. Talmid Kol HaYomim, Kol Tov.